Mike and the Mechanics. We kennen deze supergroep van hun grootste successen zoals The Living Years, Silent Running en All I Need Is a Miracle. Ze waren een tijdje uit beeld, maar oprichter Mike Rutherford blies het project nieuw leven in met zangers Andrew Roachford en Tim Howard, met wederom groot succes. Mike Rutherford heeft een lange geschiedenis in de muziek. Halverwege de jaren 60 richtte hij op 15-jarige leeftijd de band Genesis op, tezamen met Tony Banks en Peter Gabriel. En ja, de rest is history. Mike, welcome. Thanks for taking some time out from your busy tour schedule. I understand this is your first time on Skype. Now, you started your musical life in another era, the 50s and 60s, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Yet, what's going on for you right now?
Sure. Well, I'm amid Mike and the Mechanics tour. I did a month in America, which is good fun. I did just finishing off a month in England, and then about 3 weeks in Europe. And it's been going really well.
You're working now with the second incarnation of Mike and the Mechanics. How did the renewal of the band come to be?
The original Mechanics in the 80s, we sort of ground to a halt when Paul Young died. Because it used to be myself and the two singers, Paul Carrick and Paul Young. When Paul Young died, the older Paul Young, we just sort of felt it was the end of an era. And I restarted about 4 years ago with Andrew Roachford and Tim Howard, two great singers. And we did a lot of live work, because the Mechanics never played live before much. And so those songs hadn't ever been heard by the public, so that was a good sort of starting point. Did an album 4 years ago, and I started writing again recently. I've been dragging my feet a bit.
And I understand that there's a mysterious new writer working with you. Do you want to reveal who it is?
Clark Datchler, who's been helping writing, and it's gone very well. I'm very excited.
Clark Datchler, of course, from Johnny Hates Jazz, is writing the new album with Mike and the Mechanics. And Mike, if we can just dive into your roots a little bit. Is there an early musical memory that you can share with us that sparked your own journey to become a professional musician?
What comes to mind is hearing Cliff Richard's. His album, the opening track was called Move It, which is a great song. And Cliff and the Shadows, I mean, they were very cool then. They really were. That guitar sound excited me.
And did you hear his music on radio at the time, or did you have a vinyl?
Oh, vinyl. There was no radio, really. There was no radio at all until I was about sort of 11, 12, or, then the chart show. Mm-hmm. People today can't imagine, because, everywhere you go now, every shop, airport, lift, restaurant, they're pumping music out. But in those days, it was only 2 hours on a Sunday afternoon, the chart show. That was all there was, really.
Do you think there's a disadvantage to the never-ending stream of music we hear these days?
Well, I can't say that, because it's just, things change, they develop, and they go where they go. So yeah. It's kind of what it is. Mm-hmm. But I think the difference really is that when you used to buy vinyl, it was a treasured possession. You saved up for it. Now, you can get music for free everywhere, so it doesn't mean quite as much anymore.
Maar de vinylwereld maakt een gigantische comeback. En het laatste album van Raccoon, All in Good Time, is ook verkrijgbaar op vinyl. En dit nummer is het eerste liedje op de B-kant. Zometeen hoor je meer van Mike Rutherford na Guilty. De gast voor de Songline Choice is Mike Rutherford van Genesis en Mike and the Mechanics. Mike, you started your first band when you were 9 years young. It was called the Chesters. Can you tell me a little bit about it?
Yeah, funny enough, my partner, the Chesters, is from Manchester and came to see me a few days ago up there in Manchester. We played a show there, Dimitri Gryliopoulos. In those days, if you were at school and played an instrument, anyone else in the school did the same thing. You sort of bonded straight away. And Dimitri played a bit of guitar and a bit of drums. So that was the band. We learned a couple of songs, badly, and that was it.
Oh, my goodness. Have you ever had a tennis racket phase?
No, I didn't. I got a guitar quite young.
What kind of guitar was it, your first one?
Acoustic, 6-string, which I couldn't tune, but the master could tune at school. He went out of tune, had to wait till he came back for the next lesson. And then I bought a Hofner guitar when I was about 10.
That must have been a big day.
Yeah, I went in the shop with my mother and I bought an electric guitar, jazz guitar, and the guy said to me, "Do you want to buy an amplifier?" And I said, "What's an amplifier?" So I did, and there I went, off I was going.
Mike, often it is some kind of conflict when we are in our teens that can propel us forward to find our own creative path. You know, you founded Genesis when you were 15. Was there a conflict between the environment that you were being educated in as a child and what was going on musically and socially and culturally in Britain at the time?
Yeah, that was a key moment, actually, in a sense. It's not written about very much, but that huge cultural change took place in the 60s. And what it really was that until the 60s, you know, if you're a young man, a teenager, your ambition was to become like your father, wear the same clothes, do the same sort of things. There was no youth culture. And I think because after the 2 world wars, our parents were just shocked and tired. And a change was coming because, you know, the schools were old-fashioned, English empire days, old-fashioned rules and regulations. It was due a change. It was slow to come, but I think it exploded after the 2 world wars. And suddenly kind of pop music came in, jeans, you know, scooters. Mm-hmm. For the first time, there was a youth culture. And I think the reason it happened then was because I think the generations before us were just shattered after 2 world wars.
So what kicked off the change?
You know, what kicked it off was the Beatles, really. Mm. And they're a bit older than me, but 5 or 6 years. The Beatles and the Stones and the Who and the Kinks. It was very much, for me, English-driven. I mean, incredible bands around that time. It's a bit like it was a blank canvas. Kind of new sort of art form of music. And so there were no precedents. Do what you wanted. And I think when any sort of new style of anything starts off, the first wave is the most exciting.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Okay, so you turned into an adolescent. You were 15. You founded Genesis with Tony Banks and Peter Gabriel. What was your worldview at the time? Were you politically aware?
You know, I think the worldview at that age, first of all, when you're 15 or, you know, in your teens, the future is about a year and a half. You can't see beyond that.
Yes.
And, you know, in order to get a band off the ground, you had to be absolutely obsessed, which we all were. There wasn't much outside music. I was just lucky to bump into school with Tony Banks and Peter Gabriel. That was sort of just a good coincidence, really. But I think your world is music, really.
And you have written a book now called The Living Years, which is the first Genesis memoir.
Yeah, I mean, you know, a book just about what I've done in Genesis and the mechanics is not very interesting because the facts are all out there. It's really about, I found my father's unpublished memoirs about his life in the Royal Navy and the World Wars and the Korean War and his active service. And it kind of inspired me to sort of make connections, because actually our lives were not as far apart as you think, you know, traveling the world, being away from home. Mm-hmm. And so in the book, I use sections of his writings in italics to sort of balance between the two of us, really. And it's really all about that kind of story of Genesis and the mechanics, but against that cultural change in the 60s. Because it was a very, very unique time. And I think there was a big left turn in the UK.
En gelukkig worden er nog steeds flower power teksten geschreven. Onder andere door Alain Clark. Hier is hij met Love is Everywhere. Bonus Songlines, het reizende programma van Radio 2 vanuit Nashville. De gast is veteraan-muzikant Mike Rutherford van Genesis en Mike and the Mechanics. Mike, when you're in music as long as you, do you develop a specific way that you create things? Like, does it always start off with chaos or does it become quite organized?
The creative process is something I don't talk about much because it's so sort of out of your hands. You really can't control it. Things come or don't come, you know, it's sort of, it's something in the ether. I think the key creatively is to be able to recognize there's something special. I can apply that to the way Genesis used to write after Phil started singing was we'd go in the studio. Once the solo album started happening, we'd go into Genesis to write an album, and we'd bring no material in. So we'd go in day one, plug in, cross our fingers, and just start jamming. And out of, Phil would have a drum machine loop going. He'd be singing, Tony on chords, me on guitar and keyboards. And out of sort of moments of absolute chaos, suddenly a bit would appear, and the key was to recognize that, hey guys, this is a nice little bit here. That's how he wrote.
And you are quite renowned in the songwriting world for not being afraid to play wrong notes or wrong chords. Do you do that deliberately in the creating process?
You play some weird stuff. You have to go right out there on the edge, over the cliff, to know if you've gone too far or not. If you don't, which I find some American musicians sometimes a little too rigid because they're scared of playing wrong notes. I play wrong notes all the time. I remember when Andrew Rutherford first came to work with me. Andrew came down the first day, and I think in his mind he saw me and Genesis as sort of very, musical, theoretical. You know what I mean? And sort of chord sequences, and I can't read any music at all, and I just bang stuff out and then go, that's good. I think he was it really worked for us. I'm sort of get up and go, make a bit of noise, see where it's brave. Get some wrong chords, try that. No, oops, no. And I think he found it more exciting to write together. Yes. It's definitely not cerebral at all.
Tijd voor de songline choice van Mike Rutherford. Mike, out of the many albums that you have recorded, both with Genesis and Mike and the Mechanics, which one do you associate the most with travel and adventure?
First Mechanics album. No one had any idea it was going to be any good. And I wrote some songs with B. Robertson and Chris Neal, went to Montserrat to record it. And the demos were me singing, so they sounded absolute rubbish. And you could see the musicians thinking, oh, God, what are we doing here, My high falsetto voice singing the demos. And I started to think, oh, God, I'd flown everyone out to all the gear to Montserrat, flown the musicians out. It was an unknown quantity. And I was in the studio there, and I was thinking, I don't know, is this going to be okay, And then we started routining, all it is a miracle. Suddenly you felt, actually, this is good,
Yes.
And you thought, and I never really had any more doubts after that, but it was just hearing the chorus, actually, with the drummer playing it and keyboard playing. I thought, this is going to be okay, I'm not wrong.
Knikkende knietjes zat Mike Rutherford in de studio in Montserrat. Niet wetend of Mike and the Mechanics een succes zou worden. Dit stond op het eerste album All I Need Is a Miracle uit 1986. En het is de songline choice van Mike Rutherford. Mike, last question. The world definitely needs a miracle right now. What miracle do you hope for the future?
I'm concerned about the amount of space in your brain these days with the internet and Twitter and all that sort of stuff and Facebook. I'm worried about people aren't in the now enough, where they are, in their house, in their village. They're always looking at something else somewhere else. People, where I live in the country, in the old days, people never left the village. Their life was where they were with people and their friends. And now, on the one hand, it's wonderful. You can talk to someone miles away, but you often forget people nearby. So I feel there's needs to be an adjustment there. My thought for the day.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much.
Simone Walraven.
Dit was een podcast van Avro Tros. Wij maken tientallen podcasts per week. Van klassiek tot pop, van actueel tot archief, van reguliere radioshows tot speciaal voor podcast gemaakte programma's. Kijk voor meer podcasts op avrotros.nl.